Hello students. This video is the second video for week 1 of English 283. Today I'm going to read Sunday Afternoons by Yusuf Komunyakaa, talk about how to read a poem, talk about using concrete specific language, and then we will take a look at your short writing exercise for the week, which is available on Blackboard. So first, Komunyakaa's poem Sunday Afternoons. If you go to the Blackboard site, click on Readings, you should be able to see the PDF there for the poem, and click on that. While I'm reading it, you should bring the poem up and read along with me. It's also a very good idea for you to pause the video now if you haven't read the poem yet and read it through a few times on your own, just so that nothing I say is going to be the first time you hear it. Okay, so whenever you're ready, come back. Sunday Afternoons by Yusuf Komunyakaa. They'd latch the screen doors and pull Venetian blinds, telling us not to leave the yard, but we always got lost among mayhaw and crabapple. Juice spilled from our mouths, and soon we were drunk and brave as birds diving through saw vines. Each nest held 3 or 4 speckled eggs, blue as rage. Where did we learn to be unkind? There in the power of holding each egg while watching dogs in June dust and heat, or when we followed the hawk's slow, deliberate arc? In the yard, we heard cries fused with gospel on the radio, loud as shattered glass in a Saturday night argument about trust and money. We were born between oh yeah and god damn it. I knew life began where I stood in the dark, looking out into the light, and that sometimes I could see everything through nothing. The backyard trees breathed like a man running from himself as my brothers backed away from the screen door. I knew if I held my right hand above my eyes like a gambler's visor, I could see how their bedroom door halved the dresser mirror like a moon held prisoner in the house. Okay. So it's important to read a poem out loud to hear how it sounds, to hear the rhythm of the language. Poetry is almost always meant to be read aloud. So it's good to do that. Read it a couple times just to yourself, and then read it out loud or have someone read it to you. It's always good. Okay, so a few things on reading poetry. First is to read slowly. Definitely more slowly than you might read to yourself in your head. That way you get to feel the impact of each word, which was carefully selected to fit into the poem and say exactly what it's saying. The next thing to note is that the ends of lines don't always mean that you pause. I have here another document here. You can see my commentary added to the poem, and I'm going to upload this and we'll take a look at this for the rest of this video. So at the end of the first line, we have no ending punctuation, which means it is an enjambed line. It just runs on to the next. That's what enjambment means. You don't have to remember this word or ever use it yourself, but I will probably use it again, and so it's good to know what it means just for now. All right. The other kinds of lines are end-stopped lines, which means that they do have ending punctuation. So you can see Venetian blinds there has a comma after it, which means that we'd pause for that. Telling us not to leave the yard, there's a period, so we'd pause for that longer than we would for the comma, just like reading a regular sentence. And throughout the poem, that's the way you would read. A little slower than normal, but don't pause if there's no punctuation, and do pause if there is. When we're talking about poetry, we talk about the speaker of the poem. This poem uses the word I. If you go down to the bottom, you see, I knew, I could, I stood. So there is someone speaking this poem to us. That person is not necessarily the poet. A lot of times poets will write what is called persona poems, where they adopt someone else's personality and they write from that point of view. Someone who was in a situation that our poet was never in, for instance, they're trying to capture that emotion. So instead of talking about the poet, we wouldn't say things like, the poet was told not to leave the yard. We'd say the speaker was told not to leave the yard. In fiction, we would call this the narrator. The narrator is the person who is telling us the story, who's speaking this, who has experienced this. Okay. Another little vocabulary thing to know is stanza. Each of these groups of lines is a stanza of poetry, which is just a verse paragraph. Like a paragraph in prose writing, you break it up by sentences that generally stick together. In verse, in poetry, we call it a stanza. Not all poems have stanza breaks. Many do. It's there's a purpose for it that we'll talk about later in the semester. Here you can see each of these stanzas: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess I scroll down so you can see that, or we can just get rid of my face. So these stanzas are all 5 lines. So our poet is creating a pattern. This also, you'll notice these stanzas are end stopped. Each of the last lines here has punctuation at the end. For the first part, anyway. Okay. What else? Okay. We'll come back to these notes in a little bit, but first, when you're reading poetry and you're trying to interpret it and understand it, there are 3 questions that you want to try to answer that will help you understand the poem if it isn't clear to you already. Like, this poem may be clear to you already. For some people, it's not. And so there are 3 questions that you can try to answer to help yourself. The first is, who is the speaker? Who is the person telling this to us? The second is, who is the audience? Who is the poem written for? Sometimes poems will have the word you in them, so they're written directly to a person or a group of people. This poem doesn't have that. Sometimes poems are written just for a general audience. Anyone could benefit from it. Anyone could learn. That's fine too. So who is the audience? Knowing if there is a specific audience, I should mention this. If there is a specific audience, then often you can understand a lot more about the poem. Just knowing, like, if this is written to school children, or if this is written to politicians or soldiers or figure skaters, I don't know. There could be any specific audience, and that might help you figure out certain parts of the poem, like uses of words, or the last question, what is happening in the poem, the so what of the poem. So if you can answer part of this, you might have a better idea of this, you might have a better idea of this. Answering these might help you to answer this. All of these questions are interrelated. So if you can try to come at each of them and add parts to your understanding of them all, that's going to help you to understand the poem as a whole. All right. So let's go back up to the top. They'd latch the screen doors and pull Venetian blinds, telling us not to leave the yard, but we always got lost among mayhaw and crabapple. So we've got the word we here, which means that our speaker is speaking for themselves and some other people. We know if we keep on reading that our speaker has brothers who are there along with them. And this, they'd latch the screen doors and pull Venetian blinds, telling us not to leave the yard. Well, that's the sort of thing that parents might tell children, or caretakers might tell children. We're gonna lock you in the yard. Don't leave the yard. Stay there. You'll be safe there. But our children are, they're not obeying necessarily. They got lost among mayhaw and crabapple. Juice spilled from our mouths, and soon we were drunk and brave as birds diving through saw vines. So our speaker and their brothers are eating fruit. Crabapple is specifically noted. I don't think mayhaw have fruit that you can eat, but anyway, they're eating crab apples. Soon we were drunk and brave. Drunk in this situation, I don't think means drunk on alcohol. I read that as sugar high from eating all the fruit, but who knows? If the crab apples are going sour, if they're fermenting, they might actually be drunk. Drunk and brave as birds diving through saw vines. So here we have the children, we compared to the birds diving through saw vines, which lets us know not only the children are brave, they're feeling ready to go, but there are also birds there diving through saw vines, taking risks. They're doing something risky. The saw vines they sound violent. Each nest held 3 or 4 speckled eggs, blue as rage. So we've got this natural comparison between the children and the birds. And then we have this surprising comparison. The speckled eggs are blue as rage. If you do an experiment and you walk down the street and you just ask 100 random people, complete this phrase, as blue as blank. Unless those people have read this poem, or unless they're trying to screw with you, no one is going to say rage. They'd say as blue as the sky, as blue as the sea, as blue as the ocean, as blue as a robin's egg, something like that. But here, Komunyaka's dropping this surprising comparison here, and it jars the audience. We're fine with comparing children to birds diving through saw vines. They're wild and reckless. But blue as rage is unfamiliar. That's surprising. Eggs as blue as rage is weird. Okay. Where did we learn to be unkind? There in the power of holding each egg while watching dogs in June dust and heat, or when we followed the hawk's slow, deliberate arc? So our children are out, they're playing in nature, they're drunk and brave. They're blue as rage, so maybe they're feeling angry about something. They're learning to be unkind. And right now they're asking this question: where did we learn to be unkind? Where did it occur to us to be unkind? There in the power of holding each egg while watching dogs in June dust and heat, or when we followed the hawk's slow, deliberate arc. So I want you to imagine, close your eyes for a second. Imagine you're holding an egg. How are you holding it? How do you hold an egg? All right, so open your eyes again. Are you holding it like, whoops, ignore that. Are you holding it like this? Egg in the palm of your hand? Or like this speaker is doing, they're watching dogs and they're following the hawk's slow, deliberate arc, and they're holding the egg and learning to be unkind. It's possible that they're holding it and they're prepared to throw. They're watching the dogs, they're going to throw the eggs at the dogs. They're watching the hawk, they're going to throw the egg at the hawk. Yeah. All right. In the yard, we heard cries fused with gospel on the radio, loud as shattered glass in a Saturday night argument about trust and money. Here we have another comparison. The cries are fused with gospel on the radio, as loud as shattered glass in a Saturday night argument about trust and money. So this is violence, shattered glass in a Saturday night argument about trust and money. These Saturday night arguments have really taken hold in our speaker's mind. And this unkindness, this violence of throwing eggs, if you read it like that, ties in to this violence that they are remembering now and potentially hearing right now. Now we have a strange stanza. We were born between oh yeah and god damn it. I knew life began where I stood in the dark looking out into the light, and that sometimes I could see everything through nothing. This right here, where we don't have punctuation after the word see, this is called cross stanza in Jamit. It helps to push the poem forward. If you don't pause between stanzas, then the momentum of that line carries on through to the next line. It makes you, as a reader, speed up a little bit. Also, this stanza does not have concrete imagery. I'll talk about this a little bit later. The speaker's talking about abstractions. So there's nothing in this stanza that you can really see. We've got dark and light, but you can't see those things any more than dark or light. They're very generic. We can't hear how these two phrases sound. We don't see the pain of birth described. All of this is without any of the imagery that we get in the rest of the poem. We know what kind of blinds they are. They're Venetian blinds. We know what a screen door looks like. Mayhaw and crabapple, if you know what they are, they're sights, they're smells. There's a taste associated with crabapple, for me at least. This is a physical feeling. This is a physical feeling. This is visual. So all of those are appealing to the senses, but here we don't have that. It's abstract. And the end of that sentence, everything through nothing, even more abstract. Dark and light, at least I have some visual thing that goes with them. Even if it's just a little bit. This is nothing. The backyard trees breathed like a man running from himself as my brothers backed away from the screen door. I knew if I held my right hand, and the last stanza is an entire sentence on its own. So the sound of the trees breathing, the wind moving through the trees has a specific sound. It sounds like a man running from himself as my brothers backed away from the screen door. Interesting. I knew if I held my right hand above my eyes like a gambler's visor. So our speaker is taking a risk. If you're comparing, if they are somehow compared to a gambler's visor, we know that they're taking a risk with this. I could see how their bedroom door had the dresser mirror like a moon held prisoner in the house. This is another surprising comparison. A moon held prisoner in the house is strange. Okay. So, gone through, you've seen some of my notes. What I'd like you to do now is pause the video and get the poem in front of you and see if you can answer these questions or how much you can answer about each of these questions. It's okay if you're struggling with this a little bit. This is your first time doing it potentially, and that's okay. Just push yourself. Try to figure out what you know about the speaker. Even the small details, like some of them that we talked about, like the speaker being young, that can help you get at the meaning of the poem. So go ahead and pause, and then when you come back, we'll take a look at these. Okay, let's start with the speaker. What do we know about our speaker? Well, we know, hold on, let me change the text color here. All right, our speaker is young. The parents or whoever tells them not to leave the yard. They live in a woodsy area, a lot of nature around them, are either in their backyard or near their backyard. They have that mayhaw and crabapple. They get lost in the trees. There are birds diving through saw vines. There are dogs. There's a hawk. They can find eggs in nests. They have brothers. This is explicit. My brother's backed away from the screen door. They eat fruit from the trees and they get sugar high. In my reading anyway, they're sugar high. They have parents or guardians, I guess, who fight on Saturday nights, right? Saturday night argument about trust and money. And those fights on Saturday nights happen with some frequency. Our speaker might have some anger issues. They're talking about learning to be unkind when they were a child, which sounds like it's something that they're still struggling with. Okay. And sorry, I say it sounds like something that they're still struggling with because the question, where did we learn to be unkind, means that they still know how to be unkind, or if they haven't forgotten. Okay. Our audience here is potentially a general audience. There's no you. The word you isn't used. Might be something that's important to anyone. It might be for the speaker's brothers. The word we is used a lot. It might be something that our speaker wants to share with those brothers. Okay, so what's happening here? We've got a young person whose parents fight on Saturday nights. Young person has some anger issues. And at the end of the poem, the young person is looking in the house at something. They're listening to cries fused with gospel. Now, it could be, we know that these cries fused with gospel are as loud as shattered glass in a Saturday night argument about trust and money. But this isn't Saturday nights. This is Sunday afternoons. So something else is happening on these Sunday afternoons. The parents are not fighting anymore. They're having sex. Our speaker is just beginning to understand how complicated relationships can be. Even though every Saturday night they have violent fights, we know that shattered glass is a part of those fights. Violent fights about trust and money. Right now, the speaker's parents are inside having makeup sex or just sex in general. And for the speaker who's very young, this the sex and the violence, the love and the violence are intertwined. They're realizing just now, in the moment of this poem, that this is where they and their brothers came from. We have the idea of the backyard trees are breathing like a man running from himself as my brothers backed away from the screen door. So the brothers are backing away from where they came from. They're backing away from the reality of themselves. They don't want to see it. But our speaker is willing to shade their eyes like wearing a gambler's visor, take the risk to learn more, to find out what it is. They can see everything through nothing. They're learning about life, about the world. The complication, the comparison, or the intertwining maybe of love and violence, of sex and violence, is there in other parts of this poem as well. If you go back to the eggs that are blue as rage, you see those eggs are beginning of life for a bird, the result of sex if they're fertilized eggs, and they're blue as rage, right? That's the first hint really that we have of where this poem is going. And the moon, which is generally a peaceful image, is held prisoner in the house. There's this giant knowledge that is coming to our speaker is being held prisoner inside there. Okay, I will upload my notes for this to Blackboard, and so you can have access to these. If you have any questions about this, come to my office hours, send me an email, let me know, and I'll try to get to it. Okay. Next thing that we have, if you go back to Blackboard, click, let's move this a little over. All right, click on short writing exercises. You'll see that I've uploaded your concrete language exercise for which is for week 1. Click on that and it'll open this, which I've adapted from Western Wind by John Frederick Nims. A lot of the exercises for the poetry unit are adapted from this book, and I realized after making the video the other day that my copies of Western Wind are all on Towson University's campus, which is unfortunate, but I remember the exercises well enough to use them. All right, so what I'm going to ask you to do is write a concrete image for each of these abstract nouns. You don't need to use full sentences, just write something concrete. So I'll give you an example. An abstract noun is like the word exercise, and all of these are abstract. So an abstraction, like what I was talking about in the Komunyakaa poem, is a noun that doesn't give your reader something to sense. So dark and light, for instance, are abstract. There's not something specific and concrete that you can see there. There's not an image that pops into their head. If you say something like as dark as a dungeon cell on a cloudy night with no moon, then we have an image, right? We have this comparison that the word dark is tied to. If you have the word exercise, I've made this example here, which you might have an idea of what exercise looks like or sounds like or feels like or whatever, but not everyone has that same image in their head when I say the word exercise. If I add, instead of using the word exercise, if I say ropes of muscle straining beneath skin beaded with sweat, then we're zoomed in on someone's straining muscles under their skin. And everyone who reads that image, ropes of muscle straining beneath skin beaded with sweat, sees more or less the same thing. You might imagine your own arm straining, I imagine mine, but we all generally see the same thing. So go ahead and go on Blackboard, pull up this exercise or download it, and when you're doing this exercise, start a new document that you can add to later, and remember to put all of your short weekly writing exercises in the same document, so you just have to send one to me at the end of the semester when I'm ready to grade them. All right, this is, I think, everything. We already went over the grading policy in the last video, so if you didn't watch the last video, make sure you go back and take a look at it. I think the grading policy is near the end, and on YouTube it says when I go over grading, so find that. As always, if you have any questions, if there's anything that, if there's anything that you are curious about that I didn't go over enough, or something that you just wanted to talk about more, send me an email, come to my office hours, and I'd be happy to talk about it with you. All right? Bye-bye.